Good morning, everybody. I know I'm far from being a young Indian when I have to wear reading glasses. Welcome to the first session of Young Indians Regional Conference, Standing Tall, Connected Values, Disconnected Youth. Education is a topic very close to my heart. I used to be the National Education Chair for Young Indians for many years. And one of the reasons we started Young Indians was to make sure that we were very much part of the dialogue of understanding the issues that face the education sector and finding interventions to resolve them. UNESCO's Education for All Global Monitoring Report this year focuses on understanding the reasons why so many young people around the world, especially the disadvantaged, are leaving school without the skills they need to thrive in society and find decent jobs. As well as thwarting young people's hopes, these education failures are jeopardizing equitable economic growth and social cohesion and preventing many countries from reaping the potential benefits of their growing youth populations. Education is not only about making sure all children can attend school. It is about setting young people up for life by giving them opportunities to find decent work, earn a living, contribute to their communities and societies, and fulfill their potential. At the wider level, it is about helping countries nurture the workforce they need to grow in a global economy. As our urban populations grow rapidly, young people need skills to make their way out of the vicious cycle of poverty. In rural India, our youth need new coping mechanisms to deal with shrinking opportunities for rural work and a chance to acquire the basic foundation, technical and transferable skills which are essential to their success and participation in a rapidly urbanizing India. Most importantly, education needs to be gender disparate and inclusive so our large population of girls and young women can overcome endemic hardships and participate in India's development. Recent developments, including the global downturn, ascribe a greater urgency to ensure equitable access to appropriate skills development programs. Youth populations are large and growing. The well-being and prosperity of young people depend more than ever on the potential that education and training can provide. Failing to meet this is a tragic waste of human potential and economic power. In a sense, youth skills have never been as vital as they are today. In the context of this scenario, during this session on education, accessible, meaningful, and powerful, we will attempt to answer the following questions. What role does government play to create opportunities to our youth to learn the skills necessary to be employable? What support can the private sector give to government to achieve our goals? Does this support come in the way of advocacy and sharing of best practices and scalable models of intervention? How do we, as young Indians, reimagine our way forward and create resources to fold our future into our current reality? To answer these questions and hopefully provide us with scintillating insights are three eminent speakers. We will start today's discussion with Mr. Ananth Mani. And Ananth, please give me a minute while I introduce them to you. Ananth Mani's career has revolved around close marriage between media and technology. He started his career as a media company, Times of India, in the technology division and moved on to Cognizant Technology Solutions in the media division. Later, he built a technology division at an educational media company as head of technology. Currently, he is founder CEO of Report Bean, an IITM incubated company based out of Chennai. Report B at heart is an artificial intelligence product that captures the essence of students' holistic progress. Report B's visualization brings out analyses on each class, section, and students and how they are performing. Report B thrives to make beautiful report cards that students will love. Currently, we know what report cards look like. Students don't want to look at them. Report B is privileged to be one of the few companies working with the Education Department of Tamil Nadu in designing CC report cards and guidelines for all schools in the state. Ananth holds an MBA from the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, and electrical engineering degree from NIT. While at IIMB, he won a business plan competition and got the honorary award in Hong Kong. He is married to Ekta, blessed with Amrita and Arjun, and aspires to be an avid golfer. once his startup scales up. And as all of us know who are involved in startups, that's going to take a while. Anant, we look forward to your comments. Please come.
Thank you. Hello. Yeah. Thank you, Gayatri, for that nice introduction. I'm going to show you a couple of slides, okay, and then I'll kind of share whatever I have to share with insights. Can you help me with the slides, please? Okay. This is what we did is we worked with the Tamil Nadu government, and we took the marks obtained by the students and from each month. And you see, this is the trend, right? Students born in the month of October, November, December, on average, score 100 marks more than the students who are born in the month of May, April, and June. How many of you are born in month of November, December, October here? Fantastic. I'm not going to ask you about the June one, but this is 2010. Exactly the same. The set of students who passed out from the 12th standard Tamil Nadu board. This is 2010. See the graph. This 11, 10. When we did this analysis, we almost thought that we got the data wrong. Probably the department did some screw up in the data and we got the data wrong. 2009. Unbelievable. Exactly the same trend. And we kind of did it for last 5 years and we found the same trend. Can anybody tell why this is happening? Okay. Outliers. That was an inspiration. In fact, while we wrote a report, we gave credit to Michael Gladwell outlier thing. Like Deepak rightly said, the kids in October, November, December, the kids who are the oldest in the class, because they would have missed the admission and they're the oldest in the class. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part, typically this kind of advantage kind of goes off after 4th and 5th standard. These are 12th standard kids. Unbelievable. Till 12th, the advantage continues because this kind of physical advantage, because this, but the reason is, again, one of the teachers who kind of shared with us as the positive reinforcement that happens in the young age, that you're a good student, you do well in studies. So that positive, and he gets opportunities for electrician competition, for debating competition, that builds on to his mind, right? Till 12th. There's a nice movie called Life is Beautiful, and where the father's, it's a Holocaust story, but the outline is the father says the whole Holocaust thing as from the child's perspective as a game. And the child grows up and says that, you know why my father did it? So that I shouldn't have a scar. The kids born in the month of June and stuff are probably majorly suffering from the scars they had in the young age. Because of the analysis, what the department is doing is not to encourage parents to push the kid in an early stage to go to the school. They're taking their own time. Let the kid spend one more time in the play school and enjoy. Let the kid go 1 year later. It doesn't matter. But the kid will be far more positive towards life and far more self-confident and do well in life. These kind of insights, like I'm going to talk more and more about how data-driven decisions are changing not just education, every other field, but we are focusing on the education sector. Because what happens, right, in typical committees and forums, each of them come up with their own hypothesis, theories, and debates go on, and there's no conclusion at all. But with data, what happens is the discussion is far more fruitful, focused. This is the second analysis I'll show you. We did the pass failure rates in each of the district and mapped it to Tamil Nadu. If you see the districts in more than 20% of the person who have failed in the district is shown in the red color. And people, the districts that are less than 10% failure rate are shown dark green. Can anybody observe one interesting pattern in this? Can anybody say what is so interesting about this thing? It's a cluster, fantastic. This is changing the way the department is working. If you see why all the greens are together, why all the reds are together, why can't it be random? Right? Why can't one red be here and one red be there? Why is there a pattern about all the green? And can anybody guess the answer for it? And while we're doing the analysis, we try to refrain from guessing the answers. We kind of put it back and give it back to the teachers in the department, and they come up with the answers, and we kind of collaborate with them like that. Can anybody guess why it is clustered like that? Okay. Okay. Any other guesses? Uh, partially the answer is right. Partially the answer is right at the copying part, but not in a negative sense. Can anybody guess? Culture? Wake up. More boys there. Okay, I'm going to take two more answers. Someone who teach India.
I think more collaboration between
Brilliant.
teachers and HMs and everybody.
So what happens is the department does a lot of these training programs. Just for convenience sake, they bring school together, which is our surrounding area. So all the best practices that they have, they share it among the teachers in that particular area. So because of this analysis, what's happening is now they're collaborating across the district. The whole way in which the committee organizes or collaboration organizes any teacher program is being distributed in such a way that two different districts from North and Chennai, North Madras and Southern, North Tamil Nadu and Southern Tamil Nadu collaborate. So how, I mean, this department been doing pretty good work for the last 25 years, but very simple analysis like this changes the whole policy making decisions and how training programs for teachers are conducted. The next thing we did is failure in 12th is a very bad thing, right? It kind of affects the individual's confidence and a lot of prospects for him to go to do many other things in life. So passing in 12th is extremely important. And in government schools, the pass percentage is just 77. There is significant of people fail. So we want to know whether is there something we can do to understand the reason for failure rates. So did a small analysis. Why people fail? It's a very difficult question because we don't have data. It could be socioeconomic background. It could be background in terms of financial situation, economic situation, and psychological problem or physical problem, IQ level, many such factors, but we don't have information on all this. Very simple analysis we did, which is how many subjects the kid is failing in. So kid failing in all the 6 subjects is just 1%, and the students failing in 1 or 2 subjects is significant. About 77% of the students fail in only 1 or 2 subjects. Because of this, what's happening now is after the first test and first term, right, they're segregating people failing in 1 or 2 subjects, they're giving us special attention. With just doing this, right, not major investment, nothing, they can improve the pass percentage from 77 to 97%. I just want to share some of how data-driven decisions are going to significantly affect the education, help in better resource planning, help in focusing on specific area which will give fantastic impact to the society. Yeah, Gayatri, I'm done.
Thanks a lot, Anand. That was fascinating. And we will get back to why data plays such a crucial role during the question and answer session. Our next speaker is Mr. C.P. Vishwanath. And for those of you who have heard of Karadi Tales, here is the founder of Karadi Tales. So please give him a big hand. Mr. Vishwanath is the CEO, Managing Director of Karadi Tales. He holds a bachelor's degree in Science and Information Technology from Mumbai and is a trained professional Carnatic Chennai vocalist. He is engaged in imparting English language learning programs known as Karadi Path program to classes 2 to 4 in schools across Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. This program has been well accepted both by students and the schools where it was introduced. The program is a result of 3 years of research on language pedagogy based on the mother tongue, acquisition processes, and the unique Indian experience of multilingualism. Can we please have your comments?
Can I close this? Yeah. Good morning to my fellow panelists and good morning to all of you. I want to talk less about what we do. I want to talk a little bit more because I have labeled the session as Reimagining Rural Schooling. So I want to paint a few pictures and then hopefully, that will lead to a certain kind of discussion. The US President Barack Obama, says that the new race is the education arms race with India and China. Unfortunately, his perception of Indian education is based on a few IITians and not based on the reality as it exists. Another recent worldwide global survey of educational or schooling outcomes was what is called the PISA survey. 2 Indian states participated in it, which is Himachal Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, which are among the 2 better states as far as schooling is concerned. We ranked 72 out of 73 countries. The 73rd country was Kyrgyzstan. Above Kyrgyzstan was India. So 2 very contrasting pictures. One is Obama's view of how we are doing in school, and one the actual assessment process that was a standardized assessment process. Now, it is not that a lot of us are not aware of the challenges that exist, but for some reason or the other, we have not been disturbed enough by the fact that schooling is not serving a large majority of students. We have just not thought hard enough about wiping the slate clean as far as schooling is concerned and saying that how can we reinvent this, how can we entirely reimagine this. It requires a lot of guts, it requires a large scale, it requires a lot of people to think along these lines before we can actually achieve it. And so the whole idea, or rather my little dream that I have, is that at every opportunity that I get, I talk about it. Hopefully, there are more and more people who start thinking along those lines. It is not so much to come up with a solution, but as much as to start saying that, okay, we are going to start thinking really hard along these lines. Many of you are familiar with this other picture that I was in about a month ago, and I spend a lot of time with rural schools and colleges. I am at an engineering college, first year classroom in an engineering college just outside of Salem. A bunch of eager engineering students are in the class. The teacher is talking in English, teaching whatever is the subject that was going on. The students were sitting there completely blank-faced. Nothing got through, absolutely nothing got through. The medium of education, of course, is English, and these students don't know English. And this kind of a travesty is going on across, out of the 500 odd engineering colleges that are there in Tamil Nadu, probably there are about 15 or 20 colleges that actually churn out engineers. The rest of them, unfortunately, are factories that just go through the motions. The students who come here to these colleges, and these are mostly private colleges, are families from backgrounds that have great difficulty in affording this education. The families mortgage lands, the families borrow heavily, and somehow or the other put these students through these colleges. And at the end of 4 years, somehow or the other, a majority of these students have an engineering degree. A TCS or an Infosys or a Wipro, they do visit some of these colleges, and they will conduct campus interviews. During the campus interview, if we are to look at, what is it that they look for, they ask very little about their engineering education. They look for, is this candidate capable of learning? Can we, once we bring this student or once we bring this candidate into our company, can we infuse our values? Can we infuse all the knowledge that we have, and can we transfer this person, or can we translate this person into somebody who's going to be productive for our company? They are not talking about whether the student learned engineering during the 4 years or not. Another picture of an 8th standard classroom, let us say, in many of the schools, and I think Arvind has recent experience of these situations, is that you will find a large number of students unable to read or even able to do 2-digit subtraction or at a very, very basic level. Before we kind of pass judgment on these kind of outcomes, it is important for us to recognize that when as this child has come to the 8th standard, there is close to about 15,000 hours of education that have actually gone, that the student has gone through, that teachers have contributed to. I mean, we may all have our opinions in terms of what is the quality of this schooling, but nevertheless, 15,000 hours of effort have gone into this whole place. And if at the end of the day, the outcome is that you can't do two-digit addition, if you do not understand a simple story they cannot re-narrate at 8th standard level, we have to go back and ask the question as to what did we do during these 15,000 hours. Why have I painted these pictures? Because there's a lot of thought and a lot of very sincere thinking that is happening among a lot of people in India in terms of the education framework. And the National Curricular Framework, which the NCERT has recently framed, is something that if you look at it out of the context of what exists in India, is a very, very imaginative and a very nice document. But the moment you have to apply it to the schools that we have currently, you will also find that it is one of the most impractical documents that can exist. Our teachers will not understand what that NCF is. Our teachers cannot implement any part of that NCF. So given the fact that this is the situation as far as your teaching capacity is concerned, should we be promoting the same kind of schooling that has been happening for a long time now? There is a new, as part of the RTE that has come, there's a teacher's eligibility test that is being conducted now. All teachers have to take it and pass it. This teacher's eligibility test, or TET as it is called, is just a measure of, do you know your subject? Do you know enough to teach the students of this subject? Less than 1% of the teachers who took the exam passed it. And now the teachers are up in arms saying that the passing mark should be lowered from 40% to 30%. So that they can clear this. No, these are, I mean, much as it is, it's not so much to amuse the whole situation that I'm bringing these things out, because I think somehow or the other, the volume of some of these significant facts that exist, I mean, this awareness is not quite as much as it should be. And hence we have to go back and say, I mean, is it possible that in the foreseeable future, that we will have teachers who can actually teach? My answer is that for the next 30 to 40 years, we are not going to find them. I mean, there is a whole revolution that has to happen in bringing the teachers up. There has to be an entire social change which kind of repositions the teachers' place in society, because right now we have relegated them to a very low level, and it's more, the government teachers is more like an entitlement. I have a secure job. So the passion for teaching or the interest in teaching, all of these are very, very secondary aspects. So given that this is this very gloomy picture that I'm painting, what are the various things that we can think about? And it is in this context that briefly I want to talk about what we are doing. There are two initiatives that I'm involved with. One is the Karadi Path initiative, which is largely to completely turn language learning and the process of language learning on its head by using the Indian experience of multilingualism. So you can find that some of the best schools in Chennai, the student may learn Hindi for 7-8 years, may also get 70% marks in Hindi, but at the end of 7-8 years knows no Hindi. So this is not a question of underprivileged schools or anything. This is a situation with the best schools. At the other end of the spectrum, you will find that if you go into Dharavi, one of the largest slums in Bombay, for those who are not aware of it, you will find that most of the kids speak 3 languages at 3 years old or 4 years old. So on the one hand, it can be extremely easy. On the other hand, we have a schooling process that somehow seems to make a very heavy weather out of a very simple thing. The entire experience of Karadi Path is because there are 13,000 odd English medium schools in Tamil Nadu alone, and most of these are in rural and semi-urban areas. And most of these schools, the teachers don't speak English, the students also don't speak English. So they are operating in a very, very artificial environment. Karadi Path is a solution that we have come up with in saying that if you want to teach in English, let the child please know English. Otherwise, it is like me delivering a speech to you in Hebrew and expecting that you will understand it. This is happening day on day on day in classroom after classroom after classroom. The other initiative that I'm involved with is an initiative called Isha Vidya, which is part of Coimbatore-based Isha Foundation's outreach program, where we are setting up schools in rural areas, where our primary focus is on just three things. One is language, and we focus on English. Second is maths. Third is computer usage. On all the other things, the other big dimension of this whole schooling process is exposure, exposure, exposure. Know what the world is doing, know what is happening. You decide, you read magazines, you watch videos, you decide, the student decides what they want to learn and when they want to learn and how they want to learn. But it is happening through a guided, interactive environment. We will find that less than 20% of children who go to school, and this is not true only of government schools or anywhere else, is that we don't do things related to our schooling. I mean, how many of you use calculus in your daily life? Question. How many of you use calculus in your daily lives? Yet we went through the pain of calculus, right, to some extent. I mean, for those who were, very well tuned to mathematics, probably it was a very enjoyable experience. But for a large number of people, we went through the effort. How many of us know about the different types of glaciers that exist across the world? It is not that this knowledge is useless. It is just a question of this information must be chosen by the child as something that I want to know, rather than deciding that so many things have to be taught in science, so many things have to be taught in geography, so many things have to be taught in history, and prescribing that one-size-fits-all kind of an approach that we currently have in education. At this point in time, I will just stop my monologue here, and hopefully we will have an interesting question-answer session based on this.
Mr. Vishwanath, I think you've given us several things that we can discuss in today, but particularly folding the future in and trying to envision a situation that really turns education around on its head. Our next speaker is actually an example of the same. Arvind Palagi Prasad works as a fellow for Teach for India, basically a nationwide movement of outstanding college graduates and young professionals who teach full-time in low-income schools for 2 years. The fellowship enables them to become lifelong leaders, advocating the cause of educational equity. In June 2009, Teach for India placed its first cohort of fellows in low-income municipal and private schools in Pune and Mumbai, and Arvind was just telling us how difficult of an experience that was. Today, Teach for India is based in 5 cities, Mumbai, Pune, Delhi, Hyderabad, and Chennai, comprising of 550 fellows and 198 alumni working towards eliminating educational inequity. Arvind is a 2012 fellow, currently teaching a 4th standard class in Koturpuram Corporation School. We look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Gayatri. Good morning, everyone. My name is Arvind Prasad, and I'm a 2012 Teach for India Fellow here in Chennai. Disclaimer, I am June born, so please, I somehow managed to succeed, so I'm going to thank my teachers and parents. It's a great honor to share the stage with Mr. Anant and Mr. Vishwanath. The impact that their work will have in our classrooms is amazing, and as a teacher right now, as a primary school teacher, thank you so much. I'd also like to thank Young Indians and Confederation of Indian Industries for giving Teach for India and me this opportunity to talk in front of you. So the topic that I chose was eliminating educational inequity, a sense of possibility. The term educational inequity, what does this mean? Let's look at this. The dog sat in the car. It's a very simple sentence. The dog sat in the car. 23 of my 25 4th standard students studying in an English medium corporation school for the past 3 years could not read that sentence. Forget understanding it. They could not solve the next question. There are 9 trees with 7 apples on each. How many apples are there totally? Basic multiplication question, 4th standard. That is educational inequity. Now let's imagine this from a classroom. Let's look at it from a larger picture, whole of India. According to stats from the Human Resources Ministry, out of 200 million children in India, 4 million will not go to school. 4%, 8 million children will not go to school. 74 million children would have dropped out before passing primary school, that is fifth standard. And 172 million children will not go to college. Imagine what this means to our country. The enormity of the statistics is worrisome, troubling, and should be making you angry. And let's not forget that the quality of education received in all schools is not equal. It varies. It varies depending on gender. It varies depending on mindsets and values. It varies depending on geographical location. City, village changes. It also varies depending on your socioeconomic status. But what if we ensured that all children get high quality education? Just imagine what this means to a nation that has nearly 2/3 of its population younger than 35, us. Our future is in those schools. Your future is in those schools. Can you imagine how well it would be for corporations and industries to hire employees that are innovators and independent thinkers? Imagine a workforce that has its basics so strong that learning new ideas and concepts is accepted and encouraged. It's a known fact that at least 75% of our new hires or college graduates are not industry ready. The change, the strength that we want to see in our companies, in our life, and in our India will happen if all children get excellent education. But in the meantime, our short-term theory of change starts from the place where the children are, the classrooms. I've been given a great education opportunity, and I recognize that. I was born here in Chennai. I grew up in Jakarta, Indonesia, and then I went on to the US to get my Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering from Purdue University. I then worked there in the US for 3 years as a design and development engineer. I quit my job, and I joined Teach for India. What is Teach for India? What is the idea behind the fellowship? So the mission of Teach for India is to create a movement of leaders to eliminate educational inequity. And how is this done? Through the fellowship, and I'm a fellow, where India's most promising college graduates and high-performing young professionals are recruited and selected to teach in a low-income community school for these 2 years. We are essentially full-time primary school teachers for these 2 years. And what does this do, you can ask? What does the fellowship do? It helps us, the fellows, understand the stark realities of what is wrong with our education system for our country. For us to witness the powerful impact that we can have as a teacher in a classroom and use that knowledge to go make a difference in the rest of the country, that is what this helps us. Some of our alumni have gone on to start their own charter schools. Some of them have written their IAS exams to join the government. And 65% of our alumni are now working in the education sector, either directly or indirectly. I personally was not aware of all the issues that our education system has till I started teaching. And there's a lot of pieces to solving. It's just not one silver bullet that can solve it. Teacher training, better teacher compensation and recognition, improved infrastructure, and definitely capable leaders in admin and bureaucracy. Personally, after this, if I decide to start working in the education sector, the community project that I'll do at the end of my 2 years will help me understand what the community needs, what our children needs, and what India needs. That is a long-term theory of change that we want to see. Mobilize the Teach for India alum to make a greater impact, where the ripple effect will start being seen all over the country. How has this experience been for me so far? Teaching is the toughest thing I've ever done in my life. It shakes you fundamentally. It's a very nice Swades romantic story to hear, oh, you teach in a low-income community school, that's awesome, you're giving back to the community. But it's so physically challenging and mentally challenging. It tires me every single day. The incessant power cuts, 7 hours of standing and teaching. The poor infrastructure where sudden rains provide my school with a pool, and it's a dirty water pool, no chlorine for sure. And then, of course, not to mention the daily differentiated lesson plans and the correction of papers. A teacher's work is non-stop. But why do I and 500 other fellows do this every day? The children. The stark truth that my kids, my 4th standard students, are in kindergarten level compared to the peers in English and maths who study in private schools is shocking. How could we have allowed this as a nation? How can we let this happen? Children that think, dream like their peers do not get the basic requirements like education, hygiene, and infrastructure to meet those goals. They want to become artists, they want to become engineers, they want to become IAS officers, pilots, businessmen, doctors, but they're just not given the same opportunities that I was given, and maybe that you were given. This fellowship has made me realize that my role as a teacher and a role of a teacher goes beyond the lesson plans and paper correction. My kids deal with issues of drunken fathers, absent mothers, immoral relatives, and come from abject poverty. Death is another happening for them. Rain means to move their entire family from their house to a stadium. So what can I do in return? What can I, as a primary school teacher, do in return? I can provide a safe classroom where the learning experience is valuable and memorable. I, as a teacher, will have to start guiding them to start having goals, but also to start realizing what effort needs to be made to start making that. Fourth standard seems early, but it's already too late. They've wasted 3 years of their life. Children, if given a chance, do wonders. Mine do every day. All they want from a teacher is a chance to shine and excel. And that is what I and all the other fellows strive to do. Providing consistency for students, providing quality education, that is the key for change. What seemed like a ridiculous effort when I started, I thought this was not possible. Teaching kids was going to be impossible. Now seems possible. And that is what I mean by sense of possibility. After being in school for 3 months, I see the powerful impact a dedicated and committed teacher can make. The children notice it too. They recognize the need to work hard. They recognize the need to study. They want to be challenged intellectually, someone that will allow them to ask why. So that they can ask why the sky is blue. Why is Earth around the sun? Why can't we get closer to the sun? Questions that maybe I was not allowed to think as a child. They eat lunch quick. They stay back in class. They want to do their tables. They want to learn new words from the word chart. They read the newspaper not knowing the meaning, but they come and ask me. And that is progress. My best feedback or performance review I've ever had working in a company was a note from one of my students on Teachers' Day. And it said, "Sir, before you come, Sheila no read tables. Now Sheila reads 6 tables." Children know the growth. They realize that they're learning. They know that growth is happening. And that is what we need to do. Imagine that I'm one person. If I, as a teacher, can make a difference in a classroom, imagine what 500 fellows in a classroom can do. If I can do it, so can you. And if you can, your friends and peers, your family, then your companies can start making a difference. And then you start seeing the change, the city, the state, and then our country. The phrase sense of possibility is very misleadingly simple. It's just like an idea. It seems very easy. But it needs to be believed with strong passion that yes, we can change the state of education in our country. Yes, we can ensure all children go to school, but also they receive high quality education. It's not just about numbers. It's about what value and what knowledge they learn in that class. It's a long struggle and battle. People have been doing it for a long time, but now the awareness has started increasing. But it is possible. It needs to be for our children's sake, for our sake, for our country's sake. I fight the battle every day in a classroom. You can help us as well. Support individuals and youngsters that want to tackle this problem head on. Encourage them. Support youngsters to join fellowship. Support organizations that want to make children's education empowerment the lead or the main goal. Work with your company's CSR initiatives to provide and fund organizations that want to make teaching an aspirational profession. If you're in college, think of what you can do on your weekends. Think of how much struggle you've had during college, what things you wish you had learned, how the next generation would value from it. Demand better education for all children. Do not stop with just one school. Demand better for all children. Demand better teaching quality and help achieve that quality. Then I'm sure that our great country will have a day where we have eliminated educational inequity. Thank you.
Wow, young Indians, I think you have been faced with a challenge. I think he's thrown the gauntlet down, and I'm sure we can rise to that. We are opening the floor for questions. We don't have a lot of time because our next session is about to start. So I will open the floor for about 3 questions. If you have them, mics are going around, I'm sure we have a lot of very inspired audience members today, so can I have a question from the audience? Bit dumbstruck with your speech. But still, come on, let's ask some good questions. There we go.
Good morning, all. This question is to Mr. Vishwanathan. He was saying that we should allow the children to select what they want to pursue in their career. Again, going by the statistics, if you ask 100 children what they want to do, probably 90 of them will say pilot or engineer or doctor, that's it. So it's very difficult for a children to understand what they want to become or what they are capable of. Okay, it is only the planners who has to decide what is better for them and how the learning has to be given to those children. So this is my view. Why was that you said that we should allow children to select what they want to become?
Just to clarify, I don't think I said children should be allowed to select their careers. I said children should be allowed to choose what they want to learn. So
What they learn is what
no, let
they become.
me right at the second and third standard level. We want, after saying that the basics of language, so your ability to learn or your ability to absorb input, whether the input is coming from books, whether the input is coming from television, whether the input is coming from newspapers, magazines, or whatever be the source, that I can actually read and understand. So to that extent, communication has been established for me to absorb information or knowledge in whichever way that I want. Right at the third standard or fourth standard level, the practical situation is that children make very, very good choices if you give them guidance and if we don't kind of thrust certain patterns and structures on them. This may seem, to an adult brain, this does seem like, really can I trust this kid? But I think ultimately the thing is that you need to spend time. And then you need to actually, see, I'm not at all an educator. My life has been one of international business for a long time until this transformation happened. And my learning is from sitting in hundreds of classrooms because I do not have any qualifications. Sitting in these hundreds of classrooms has made you realize that actually all that is needed is mature guidance and a respect for the child's intelligence. Once those two things are in place, and you are not, I agree with you that, aspirational situations like everybody wants to become a pilot, everybody wants to become a cricketer, these are natural tendencies, but they grow beyond these tendencies. Actually, they do. It is the more instructed children who have these kind of narrow goals because these have been inspired by the adults rather than discovered by the children themselves. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you.
Hello, sir. This is Venkatakrishnan here. We are not giving importance to innovation in our education system. That's what I feel.
Who is your question to, sir?
Mr. Vishwanath. Okay. When I studied, my teacher said, follow whatever I said, no questions. So my daughter is studying now, same. So the students are not allowed to think out of box or there is no place for thinking actually. So innovation will happen only when the thinking is taking place. No. So we are not giving importance in our education system for innovation. So what can we do for that?
I don't think I have a simple answer, which is why I said that when I talk about reimagining the whole thing, how do you set the stage for innovative thinking to happen right at the early stage, is something where you have to foster more and more independent thought, which right now, as we say, the adult mindset is something where we do not seem to trust our children with the ability to do this on their own. The moment we start looking at it with a slightly more open mindset, innovation is the natural way that we are. Innovative is the natural way that we are. The process is what kind of slowly eliminates it. So the whole idea is, can you just remove the structure in the process, at the same time have your skeletal framework at as minimal a framework as possible, and so that there is some structure. It is not as if it is completely let loose and chaotic, but that within that there is enough room to maneuver, enough room to play, enough room to innovate. And so if you do not take innovation away, innovation is the natural way that we are. So that is really so I don't have an answer to saying that, okay, in the current system, yes, I agree with you. But I think that that's what a lot of people are battling now in terms of, I think there's a lot of thinking going on along these lines. It is just that the thinking process or the thought process is not large enough yet. And it needs to kind of cascade into something much bigger than what it is today.
I'd like to add on to a couple of points to that. There's a lot of innovation so-called innovation happening now, audiovisual learning and colorful content and many other things. If you see actually the data, right, teacher is still and will always be the kingpin of the class. An inspired teacher with enough freedom can bring in all the great innovation. Basically, the teacher will open the mind of the child. Right now, the teachers majority of them are constrained by, as they see it as a work, like I said, as a secure job and stuff, and they're given a set of instructions, you have to complete these things, the checklist, and just like a factory. It's actually like a factory, right? And they push the kids along. So there are 100 things we can do, but I think one thing which will create phenomenal impact is to have inspired teachers, respect for the teachers in the country, and give them enough freedom. That will change a lot of other things than crores of money has been put into computer-based learning and audio-visual learning. I think a small portion is given to the teachers. I think it will have 100 times better impact.
So last question. Here, this gentleman here.
My question's for all the panelists. I mean, all of you spoke about the sort of futile things that we teach our children in terms of, calculus and this thing. So with your experience, what are some of the roadblocks, mental blocks you face, speaking to stakeholders? Because everybody agrees this present stuff doesn't work. I mean, industry says most of what we teach these kids, they're not able to translate it. Kids themselves don't enjoy what they're learning. Teachers don't enjoy. So what is the mental block? Why are we still continuing with this Macaulay system of education? What is this thing?
So I think the mental block comes from just the fact that we don't trust our children. We don't trust independent learning. We don't trust independent education. And unfortunately, as we grow older, we are worried about being questioned a lot. So what happens is we think, and the learning calculus, learning all of that, which is very valid, I think you must ask the industries why we don't use it on a daily basis. I think learning it is essential, it's very important, but the practical knowledge of how to use it, we never teach it. We can use probability and statistics when you're sitting in an auto worrying about how much gas is being consumed by cars not turning off their engines, but the problem is we were never told you can use this at this moment in this life. There was no reality, like how when we're teaching addition, we say I have 5 chocolates, I give you 3, how much do I have left? We teach addition like that, but we never give like the practical application of something that's very conceptual. And I think that itself is the fundamental to say why we're not industry ready. And the same thing is, it's just unhealthy competition that we've somehow fostered it, saying you need to do this, like the way he mentioned. 12th standard pass, you have to choose science, you're so limited to your career options. There's nothing wrong. If a kid wants to be like a pilot when he's young, by the time he grows older, he's going to start getting interested in engineering, mechanical engineering, or something else. He can work for marketing of some. There's just you need to start relating what you learn in school to real life applications. And I think the onus is back on professors, teachers, and curriculum, and educators to be able to make that more valuable.
I believe less is more, right? The less you learn and learn it by complete understanding. We cram the children with, you see the kind of textbook, they can't even carry it, right? The amount of weight you have, and on 3rd standard, 4th standard, we see the syllabus of CBSE or even matriculation. They kind of mug a lot of things, but understanding is very little. But if we go by a thing which is less is more and teach them very few fundamental concepts, make them very strong, and make sure that they don't cross unless they understand the basics. Right now, like even you get 50%, 40%, 60% pass, you're pushed to. But I believe that you need to be 100% in every understanding, right? And because what happens, that builds your foundation. We focus on that. I think our mental blocks towards learning, understanding concepts can clear much faster.
Thank you all the panelists for spending an hour of your time with us this morning. Young Indians focuses on education, and I'm delighted we started this conference with the first conversation on education and a lot of challenges that this audience will hopefully think about as we start our work towards solving some of them. I'd like to welcome our next speakers. We are ready to go on to our next session. So thank you all very much. Have a very good day.
Good morning. Indeed, for me personally, very happy to be standing here for a VIA event after a gap of a few months. It feels like homecoming in many ways. First, I'll welcome our esteemed guest for this session, Mr. Sripati. I will introduce him just after I give a few remarks to context set this session, even though I think the context and the issue will be dealt and spoken by our guest, because I think he is the right man in a right place with the right experience, with great exposure. As I was just telling him, moral leadership, a very standing tall sort of a topic for the morning, something which our generation is facing, is realizing, is facing the heat of it every day, not sure if we understand it, not sure if we know how to deal it, but we have been placed in a context which is extremely complex. The world is watching us. We make tall claims to the world, but seem to be standing low in some of those standards. Few questions as I was taking my flight in the morning from Coimbatore. Is morality, is morals something internal? Is it something which comes from your heart and mind and soul, or is it an external standpoint? That is something which I was starting to think, because you have to get to deeper aspects, because the word moral itself is extremely deep. India's greatness in the past, of course, has been its trade with the Romans and the entire world, the Silk Route, but its true standing and leadership in the world has been through its wisdom, through its spirituality, through its knowledge, through its leadership in other contexts. But today, we are running after the money. We have the muscle, but somewhere it looks as if we have lacked in moral leadership, or at least showcasing it. As I said, India has the muscle, and that muscle is today young Indians. The whole world is talking about you and me, is talking about the demographic dividend, the advantage, the greatness India has. But the world is also worried that if this demographic dividend, population, greatness that India has can go a little wrong. So this is somewhere that our generation is put on a spot where we cannot just keep quoting Gandhi or Vivekananda or the Vedas and get away with it. We seem to be living in a reality which is full of contradictions. So how do you showcase it? I don't think we can blame a generation in the past, because we seem to be the greater in number. Saying all this, I won't take more time. Mr. Sripati today is in a extremely important position as the State Information Commissioner. Many months ago, when he was Chief Secretary of Tamil Nadu, I had heard that he was from Coimbatore, but I wasn't sure. Tried Googling this morning, as I just told him, but I'm very proud that both of us have Coimbatore origin. He studied in Coimbatore initially, so I'm extremely happy to be sharing the dais with him. Officer of the Indian Service who of very high ranking and great experience. I'm not going to read through everything. I'm sure you have the details with you, but what I want to tell you is the experience is varied. experience is geographically varied and topically varied because he's been in urban development, in an urban environment, in highways, in higher education, in youth of welfare and sports. He's been in minerals and been the state vigilant commissioner. Why I say a few of these things is because you know the depth of knowledge and the width of exposure that he will have. Not taking more time, I will invite Mr. Sripati to talk to us about his thoughts on the topic of moral leadership and the context and the times in India. After he finishes, we will have a few questions for him and we'll have a discussion on that. Thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think the CII and the Young Indians have chosen the most appropriate time to talk issues which are quite relevant today in the current ambience. In fact, the concept paper which has been given to me identifies India with Liberia, tied with Liberia, etc., etc. It is sad but true. You open the newspapers or switch on the TV and you'll see or read or whatever you read, I do not want to elaborate on. So nothing can be more appropriate than the youth, the young Indians take the situations under their control and give India a leadership which will have moral authority, which means the moral leadership. In fact, I think I entered the room when the previous session was just closing. I happened to hear a couple of sentences about the educational system. A couple of sentences included our children learning by rote. There is no overall development. There is no personality development, which was part and parcel of our systems in the past. In fact, Shankar was mentioning about the morals. Where have we lost? And it's very appropriate that today we'll have to talk about the morals because our society, I'm talking about India as a society, no religion, no caste, no creed, nothing of the sort, has been the moral leader for the entire world. And that is the reason why people from the Central Asia, people from the West, people from all over started coming to India. Why do you think the Cape of Good Hope is named Cape of Good Hope? Somebody was looking for India. How do you think America was discovered? So these are all things which happened. Why? They wanted to come to India, which was considered to be a great leader those days. But we have lost it. What happened? Now, that is where the other point which Shankar mentioned, namely the demographic situations, have come to play. Now, before I get into the response for this demography, I noted down this morning the famous speech by Thomas Jefferson in the State of Freedom, the Freedom of State Address, where he put forth a plea for an informed populace, educated to discuss policies. I'll just quote, "Every government degenerates when trusted to the rulers of the population. The people themselves, therefore, are its only safe depositories, and to render this even safer, their minds must be informed to a certain degree." That education which we are talking about comes here. "The influence over government must be shaped among all people. If every individual which composes their mass participates of the ultimate authority, the government will be safe. Institutions, law, and even constitutions are no protection against official ruthlessness unless they have the backing of an aroused public opinion. The more public opinion can be kept inert, the better chance therein that abuse of power will go uncorrected. And this is precisely what has happened, and the whole thing is a fortiori applicable to us, especially. We have just got out of the colonial regimen. I won't even call regime, but a regimen.